Laws I'd like to see changed. One law that is somewhat controversial is the use of medical marijuana. Let's join Carol as she visits with the folks from the Colorado Springs Medical Cannabis Council.
That's right, Katie. There is a lot of confusion around the marijuana laws. So to get the merchant perspective, we're going to talk with Mark Slaw, and he is the membership director of the Colorado Springs Cannabis Council. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Carol.
There is a lot of confusion around the marijuana law. And could you just enlighten us as to what that is in Colorado and how it's regulated by the merchants?
Sure, I can. Back in 2000, we as Colorado voters voted to have medical cannabis in Colorado. It's a compassionate move for many terminally ill patients suffering from pain, cancer, severe nausea, muscular issues, as well as other medical conditions that can be approved for cannabis. The way the law exists currently is those folks have a constitutional right to use, transport, possess, and basically have medical cannabis or marijuana as part of their medical regime. In Colorado, in order to obtain a medical marijuana license from the state, it's actually issued by our Department of Health and Human Services. And these patients must see a doctor and apply for this card in order to use the medicine.
Okay. So then they bring this card in?
Correct. They meet with a doctor and they set up a meeting with the doctor. They bring in their medical records. They have a full doctor's examination. That was actually passed by a law called Senate Bill 109 about a year ago, which mandated how doctors must approve medical cannabis patients. So based on the doctor's recommendation and a $90 fee that these patients have to pay to our state, they turn in their application, and within about 2 weeks they get their card back. It's a red licensure and allows them to access a facility that serves medical cannabis called a dispensary or a medical cannabis center.
Okay. And how long is that card good for?
That card is good for a year. So every year the patient must pay another $90 fee, which is a little odd considering no other medication you have to pay a fee in order to use.
Okay, so then they have to show that card, and is there anyone checking with the dispensary to determine that they're checking the card?
Correct. We have now, based on some more laws that were passed last year, one called House Bill 1284, and most recently this legislative session, clarification to that law called House Bill 1043. Both of these laws have created a regulatory environment for medical cannabis in Colorado underneath the Department of Revenue. So when all of these caregivers entered the market about a year ago, they were giving a very short time frame to get applications in, to turn in background checks, fingerprints, the whole 9 yards to make sure that they're compliant and that they're not criminals entering this business. So each of these medical cannabis centers has a right, responsibility, and also oversight, regulatory authority, watching them, making sure that they're checking patient IDs and red cards or medical marijuana licenses every time a patient comes in on every visit for every transaction.
Okay. And then there's another way that they could get the marijuana is if they, through a caregiver, if they are not capable of coming themselves.
Right. Before we wrote the regulatory model for the businesses in Colorado, we had that constitutional right. And under that right, caregivers were also protected because initially with the federal status and before the Ogden memo, which stated the federal government wouldn't use federal resources to prosecute patients and caregivers in compliance with state laws, we had caregivers protected under the Constitution. Caregivers are just people that have patients sign them over to take care of their plants or provide them medicine in the event that a patient's not able to or doesn't want to.
Okay. So the regulations are pretty stringent. It is legal for medical purposes, and caregivers can also get a card and come in and get the medicine.
Exactly. One of the interesting things too is that as of last November, there were many counties in Colorado voting to enact bans on medical cannabis models under House Bill 1284. So the regulatory model where we can tax, regulate, and monitor the cannabis was in many cases around Colorado chosen instead to be banned completely. So in these locations, the patients have no choice but to go to caregivers. And caregivers are the only model available because they're still protected under the Constitution, even though the local citizens of the area or maybe the local politicians don't want to have a tax regulated and monitored model.